My name is Brad Kent, and I serve as the UIL State Director of Music. I would like to take this opportunity first and foremost to thank you for your service as a judge. On behalf of the over 1,000 marching bands in the UIL process in the state of Texas, we appreciate you very much. We're always seeking the very best, most qualified judges to evaluate our bands, and we believe that you are among those. And so again, we appreciate you very much for being here. I would also like to thank the Texas Music Adjudicators Association, specifically Jerry Miller and Mark McGahee, for their service, ongoing service in this project, and for putting together today's training for you. We hope you find the information to be both informative and valuable and helpful as you prepare for this most important evaluation process for our bands at the end of the season. Again, thank you so much. We appreciate your service.
All right, welcome everybody to our judge training for our returning veteran judges. For the 2024 area round, I'll be hosting you today. I'm Jerry Miller.
Mark McGahee.
And we're excited to just talk with you a little bit through the process. We, through this conversation, wanted to just kind of share a little bit of the progress that we've made. We started this process shortly after COVID and doing this judge training online. And as we've kind of worked our way through it, we surveyed not only our state directors, but our judges each year, asked for your feedback, asked for your advice. And so a lot of the training you're about to see is a reflection of the survey feedback that we've received. The two main areas that people wanted us to talk more about were numbers management, which we've kind of done for a couple of years now, and that still seems to be something that people want to hear more about. So we're going to talk about numbers management, but the newer piece that we're adding on to today is a long discussion about content and how we view content, how we adjudicate the content side of our sheets. In the case of the visual sheet, about 300 of the 1,000 points. In the case of the music sheet, about 150 of those 1,000 points. But to kind of help and give you some language and some ideas that can maybe just help grow that content side of things. So with that, you want to just jump into an exemplar?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's give a great example here. I think it's Albert Lowe's up next.
Yeah. So we're going to hear Albert Lowe. He's going to do an exemplar on the music front. You know, I think these exemplars are great training for us going into a judging round. You're going to find that if you go to the link that's shared below, there's a folder that has, at this point, 20, 25 exemplars of all different captions, all different levels. There's some region ones, there's some area ones, there are some state ones. Take a listen. Hear what you hear, react to what you hear, make some kind of inferences about how things are being said, and hopefully that gets your brain in a good space. So with that, we're going to listen to Albert Lowe doing a music exemplar. This is one of him just kind of reacting to about a minute or so of the show, and then we'll do a little reflection for you on kind of everything that we're hearing.
It is so refreshing to hear a woodwind section played musically and not just play a lot of notes. Yeah, even though I know you can do that, the ability to play beautifully and create these beautiful aesthetic moments. And the mezzo piano, mezzo forte register, stunningly beautiful. Nice cold attack from the battery. Appreciate the environmental challenges as well. A little bit late release on the end forms. Beautiful extension of the cadence at the very end. Really appreciate the band to be able to move it with such high velocity with such a large band. It takes a lot of maturity.
You know, Albert is such a professional judge, and he's done things. I've learned so much from him that one of the first things I learned when I started listening to exemplars, including getting to visit with Albert, I was trying to fill up so much more airtime, and I love how he lets the performance come to him, and he's not talking over really key moments, but you could tell he really enjoyed what he was listening to. He was crediting. He addressed the environmental challenges. He talked about just the quality of this, and the group was very well deserving of the superlatives he was throwing out their way.
Well, and I think as a judge, to be able to comment so freely in each of those sections, and to make sure that there wasn't a doubt in my mind that I knew what he had been listening to. Even at the most basic levels, when we talk about content, you're saying he opened everything with woodwinds in this moment, brass here, percussion here. So I always knew this was his focus, this was his. And so I think that at the early stages of content, that's a great opportunity. And he often followed, you're right, with some sort of content challenge that was present. The extension of the cadence, the environmental challenge, the beauty of the tone quality, all of those things, especially when it comes to a woodwind section, the fact that he's perceiving that, those I think are all things that we should be aiming for from that content perspective. And so I thought it was an easy kind of dive into how should we be talking about content as adjudicators. So before we even talk sheets or anything like that, when we think about, and I mentioned this in our welcome, we think about the music sheet has an ensemble, a woodwind, a brass, and a percussion box. That bottom box is content. It's 150 points. Same thing on the visual sheet. We have an individual and an ensemble movement, and then we have that content worth 300 points there. So how are we, are we just saying that hard, difficult, challenging should win out? Are we? I think that there are two approaches, and I know that kind of growing up as judges, it was always discussed with me that there are two kind of schools of thought in judging content. There's the classical approach to judging content and the romantic approach. So again, we can think about composers. We can think about the classical approach, it's like the Mozart approach to judging content. And then there is the Beethoven approach. And so we're going to talk you through both of those today, and maybe give you some tools and some insights that hopefully can kind of help you in the process. So most sheets are, and all of our sheets are, considered in terms of what and how. We can use language like content or composition. If you're like, Jerry, I don't quite get where you're talking content, let's put on our music hat for a second. It's composition. It's what's being composed for the group. And maybe this is an oversimplification, but it offers an opportunity to state, are we talking about the composition or the performance of the composition? What kind of comes to mind as we're diving into the overarching content piece?
I think there's a misconception sometimes that the group that plays the most notes always has the most content, and demand is part of it. But I think as a judge, try not to be pulled off sides, listen deeper. I think sometimes the cleverness of how it's been arranged, of wow, that's a really great layout and how they put it together, the architecture of the line. It's traded from voice to voice. It actually, you can hear the counter line, you can hear the melody, you can hear how it was traded from a group to group, and being able to understand the depth. All of us kind of get the superficial level, but how when it comes down of appreciate the demand, but don't fixate on I'm counting notes and say you have 10,000 notes and you have 1,000 notes, so it must be harder. Not necessarily.
Or the flip side of that, again, a composer. You could hear the show announcement, the music of Paul Hindemith. Right. And you go, oh, well, as opposed to another group, not that this would happen, but the music of Anne McGinty. And you might be like, well, then content-wise it can't be. But again, you could beef up Anne McGinty to a level from a compositional perspective where it does have that. You could also, unfortunately, water down Hindemith to be at that level. So, not only are those words different, but how we think about the subcaption. And so I like that you use the word demand. I think that we tend to think through the content side as repertoire. What's being asked of the performers from a very source material perspective. Okay, you're going to be playing a little bit of, we'll highlight the composers we mentioned, a little bit of Mozart, and a little bit of Beethoven, and a little bit of Stravinsky. Sure. Okay, great. That's the content or the composition, and we're weighing that against the performance as an adjudicator. So, admittedly, at area, the performance still counts for, in the case of music, 85% of the sheet, in the case of visual, 70% of the sheet. But there is a portion that is what is asked of the performer. And we know that as we advance these groups on to state, that it's actually going to be a 50-50 split for the 4A, 5A, and 6A groups in the 7-judge system. So all sheets as well are referring to the same program. Now, different aspects of the same program. So think about if I'm looking at it through the content lens of percussion, what's asked of percussion, versus a content lens of what's asked of the woodwinds, what's asked of the brass, what's asked of the visual individual versus what's asked of the visual ensemble. And so we're observing the same show as judges, but every sheet has, and every subcaption box even, has a different perspective you're going to see.
I'm sure we're going to talk about this a little bit later. There's so few things that we have in our activity where you get to literally pick your double-edged sword. Like this is the vehicle we're going to use to present our show, and you get to choose how hard it is or how not hard it is. Then of course the performance part of it really kind of dictates that. This is what I think will resonate with our performers, will resonate with the audience, and potentially that's how the effect which affects the judging community. I think one thing that with these different styles, as an adjudicator, this is really more of just the overall dynamics of judging. Have an open mind. Maybe you don't like Hindemith, but like you have to appreciate what's being presented for you. Did it resonate? Did it come across as excellence? Could I still hear each of the lines? Understanding they're going to have to take off this chunk of this, and this comes from the symphony, but this is all of a sudden the last part of Symphonic Metamorphosis, and I piece it together. But wow, the overall idea came across and it was paced really well.
Yeah.
And understanding and just showing an appreciation for each of these variety of styles.
Absolutely. And I think our goal to that point is to understand what we're seeing, what we're hearing. And I know that we're going to talk about some different kind of overarching bubbles that we can look at, especially I think on the visual front. I think as band directors, we feel very strongly about the music. We hear the music.
Yes.
We recognize what's challenging and what's not. But I think sometimes, especially on the visual lens, we might struggle a little bit more to see what could be, and then the layer of the two of musically this is happening while visually this is happening, and that simultaneous responsibility piece. So when we think about composition, there could also be that aspect of breadth and depth, and what are the cornerstones that are evolving as the show moves on. So I think there's a whole lot to kind of think about here. And so, what I thought we might kind of tackle next is that the content and the idea of that content word is that we're considering the musical things. I'm just going to read you this list: orchestration, creativity, variety, technical range, expressive range, clarity, relationships, blend, balance, simultaneous responsibility, all of those things. And then on the visual front, the use of equipment, use of body, form, development, visual design, staging, simultaneous responsibilities, environmental challenges. I mean, this is a lot to think about as you're also having to evaluate the majority of the sheet, which is the performance side.
I think one thing that could help if you feel less secure with the visual ideas and vocabulary, look at the different tools. Like you said, we recognize musically, we can see the score while they're playing it. We've done it. We've stood in front of maybe an ensemble that's played that. Maybe some of us haven't done as much in the visual department. Look and see if they're using the same devices over and over. Oh, it's a limited palette. The simple analogy of how many crayons in the crayon box are they using? They're using just red, green, and blue, or they're using there's those really cool shades, and they're understanding a breadth of that one. In some essences, it should be, if we're playing sophisticated music, there should have that same type of idea. It shouldn't have come across as pedestrian tile movement. It should have some sophistication to it. It should be very detailed, some individual non-traditional movement, but try to recognize that. Think of the word, the vocabulary that happens in music, and then try to put your lens on where you could say, here's the vocabulary they're using for the visual side of the sheet.
Absolutely. And to note, we're going to focus here, as we are, on this kind of classical, very analytical. So if what you're hearing from us right now is, wow, this feels really analytical, it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that classical approach to judging content is our ability to break things down. We all remember at some point in a music theory class in college, something was played for us, not just a single line melodic dictation, but perhaps some harmonic dictation, and perhaps some complex harmonic dictation. And we were asked to do our best to kind of put that down on paper. Now, thankfully, we're not asking our marching band judges to take what they're hearing and put it down on paper, but we are asking you to take what you're hearing and kind of assign in your mind a difficulty level to that, a challenge level to that, to understand what's there. And to Mark's point, not just the challenge level, but is the challenge different for the performers over the course of, or are you just hitting them with the same challenge? Are you asking the same musical question 5 different ways to the performers? And well, yeah, once you teach it once, like they're all going to have it. So just kind of some approaches that I think help us along that classical route to judging content. Also, I think consider the opportunities that are given the performers. Is there a moment for the woodwind section? There will be. I think with most shows that are advancing to area, are there moments for the brass? Are there moments for percussion? Are there moments for solo? Are there moments for soli and or section work, maybe small ensemble work? Are some of the combinations maybe interesting? You know, you put together a Dixieland ensemble where you have a tuba, a trombone, a trumpet, and a clarinet, and you're like, okay, that's, you know, kind of mixing things up a little bit. So are you creating achievement, or opportunities, I should say, for achievement? And then this commentary being balanced between, from a content perspective. And this is, I think, from a classical and an analytical perspective, where you're going to catch them is if you're going, well, I want to talk about woodwind content, I'm going to talk about brass content, I'm talking about percussion content. Gosh, guys, there really wasn't an opportunity to ever talk about percussion content because the percussion section never really had an exposure longer than 8 counts.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, an area I catch myself saying, or someone reminded me about it when I was doing some of my training, could the show exist if the front ensemble was not on the field? Could the show exist if the woodwinds were on the field? Now, you're hoping it's not like, oh no, we don't obey the performers, but hopefully it's been designed in a way for the woodwind part, or the front ensemble parts doesn't just always just mirror the woodwind parts. Look, there's an opportunity they get to play by themselves. Oh, they are accompanying the woodwinds, but listen how they're playing arpeggiated lines versus the lyrical melody. We're giving every chance to be featured. We address that with visually. Hopefully the color guard is supplementing and accentuating that when hopefully it's not an afterthought. Can I say one more thing about this? I think we talk about, you know, the approach of the woodwinds, brass, each of those compartments. I think another thing, think about the through composed score. And I want us to all prioritize this and value it. The use of silence, and the equivalent of that visually would be the use of stillness, where it doesn't have to be, and that kind of fits back in that demand conversation. It's just tons of notes, and then we stop this and it's tons more notes. The bookends, or the appropriate use of something where silence is there and it sets up a really great moment ahead of time, that is something where it's like, wow, that's been really well thought out, and it's a pacing comment, just like it shouldn't be filled up where we have to have something always to look at, but it's appropriate where maybe something does kind of go down. And the use of stillness, which has power sometimes. That may be more fit in the romantic side, but it something should be credited and recognized, and do address it as an adjudicator, just like you would, wow, that's a really lot of notes and the technique lined up. Wow, that was really captivating how you drew us all in, and everything became one voice, and everyone it was still except for one spinning flag or something. Anyway.
Well, no, but and two, when you start to talk through all the caption ideas and the exposures, if the only opportunities for achievement inside of the woodwind box exist in solos, in mic'd solos of let's say you only go back to one flute player over and over again,
happens a lot.
And so when it comes to content, from an analytical perspective, you can go, gosh, guys, I really didn't hear much beyond this flute soloist from a woodwind content perspective. They're a wonderful player, but nearly every great band program in Texas has a great flute player that can hold down a solo moment on a microphone with a ton of reverb, you know. So it then becomes, you know, where are we creating that variety in terms of the opportunities for the kids? So to your point with regard to how notey things are, how silence is used, how pacing can be used to create those moments, but also what's the involvement piece of that moment look like, and is the involvement always the same? is it always a solo performer? Or are we kind of playing with the numbers a little bit as we go? And so I found, I thought this would be like a kind of simplified example, but a quick idea to give us an idea of what this classical approach could look like.
I think this is a very good comparison.
So in front of you is the original Robert Russell Bennett's Suite of Old American Dances. This is the first movement. We all know this piece. I can maybe play a little bit for you as you go your way through it. But as we hear this, note the rhythmic complexities, note all of the style indicators, note the variety of articulation present for this flute player, right? So again, if I'm adjudicating the content of this, I see a fairly high level, as high if not higher than a lot of marching bands would take on.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, I'm going to flip the page and I'm going to show you an arrangement, a simplified, so, I think we think of Suite of Old American as like a grade 4, grade 5 kind of piece. They show you like a grade 2, grade 3 kind of simplified version of the same movement, a Suite of Old American. Now, musically, do these two pieces say the same thing? Will they still have the same rhythmic idea? But notice it doesn't go on for nearly as long. Note that intro is not even in the flute part anymore.
Right, it's been assigned somewhere else.
Yeah, notice that like from an articulation perspective, it's pretty monosyllabic, for lack of a better term. So when you weigh one against the other, if you were upstairs listening to it, what would you go after? I would go after the nuance and say, in that first version, there's so much nuance and detailing inside of that and so much complexity and variety. Whereas in that second version, I feel like things have been, to use the term, watered down just a little bit.
Yeah, let's say Band A is playing the original, and Band B is playing that one, which would be unfortunate. They're playing the same piece of music, whatever. But the first one, let's say the performance level is done where we can recognize excellence. Being able to hear the nuance, the personality of the line, being able to hear the bounce, the lilt, being able to hear the lightness of what happens, and then with the one that's the arranged version, you're getting the essence of them. The first one has a much deeper dive. The second one, it's like, that's great. I recognize the melody. It's put together. Give me something else. What else do you have? And it should be where the one that has less technique, they should be able to pour so much more musicianship into that one. Is it enough to equal the true nuance of the original? That would be in the performance would probably tell us that.
Well, and I often think of this term like a vehicle. Like, what is the vehicle? So we have a show that's either maybe we pay somebody to arrange or to custom compose a show for our band program. Maybe we buy music that is pre-written for different groups. Maybe we buy music from Hal Leonard or from a publisher.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
all fine and good.
All good.
But in that, we've chosen the vehicle. For those of you who are fans of NASCAR or IndyCar racing or what have you, like that's your vehicle, and that's what you're going to try and win the race with.
Yeah.
Is that vehicle going to offer you all of the detailing and the opportunities and the when we get into trouble, are we going to be able to get our way out of trouble with this vehicle? Or is the vehicle just basically made to get around the track and not have the wheels come off?
Right.
That second version here is a vehicle. It may not have the complexities, it may not have the opportunities to win that the first vehicle has in the original.
So again, we're talking about the left side of the sheet, we're talking about content. The performance will tell us that one. It doesn't again mean, oh no, the first group has all the hard notes, so they're obviously going to get more points. Not necessarily. If the performance of the group that's playing the arranged version is at a much higher level, that's where the offset. So again, you have to read through what they're saying they're doing and then to what degree they're able to do that in the performance.
So take on this next one, and here you can see the two side by side, and kind of, I'll put this up differently, but let's take a look at the trumpet part. So this is the first cornet part of the original, dee-da-dee-da-da-da, right? We all know this third movement and that Western one step, and you look at all of the opportunities inside of here. You even see in that cued section, there's a little bit of a muted trumpet idea that is cued for them, and you're like, even the complexities there, the use of accidentals, the use of dissonance, the use of the accent plus the marcato, some ideas slurred across, dynamic variation from fortissimo down to piano. We take the same idea and look at the arranged version, and we do see the same dynamics.
Still has the Divisi.
Yeah,
with the,
right. So the Divisi still has some of the dissonance, but you can already see that some of those complexities, some of those varieties, and those opportunities were kind of taken out of there. And when we put the two of them side by side, we can see that maybe the challenge of that arranged version differs quite a bit.
Yeah, it same type of idea with the lighter personality, recognizable by most judges that are with band community, but again, be able to catch the nuances. What I've noticed, there's some of the technique, like I'd say the descending chromatic line along the way. How is that represented? Is it represented somewhere else? Not that it has to be so true to the original, but again, it's an opportunity. That's a great opportunity to create this nuance that then has all these implications visually, something that winds down, something that goes side to side. So again, the vehicle, is it helping with as many opportunities as possible?
Well, and like that circle 3, that that line that we all know really well, not even in the arrangement.
Yeah.
You know, just like, that's one that I'm sure Jim Curnow, who's a great arranger,
Yeah.
likely looked at and just said, like, no,
Yeah.
we're in a grade 2-3 version trumpet. We're not going to do that to those guys.
Diminishing returns, yeah.
Yeah, and so I think too, we often know that source material that's being presented to us, and we were talking about Hindemith earlier, and you get to that moment, you go, oh, I wonder if they're going to tackle this, and you go, either A, they didn't, or B, they moved it into the front ensemble, or, C, they went after it and played it in its truest original form. And the opportunity to get creative with that, certainly we're open to those, but I think when you think about that classical and analytical approach, what you're thinking about is the truest sense of nuance and how deep our friends can dive into nuance. And so with that, I'm going to kind of wrap up the classical discussion of content and move us into a more romantic approach to judging content. So here, we're talking about how we, as audience members, receive the show. When we talk about judging things like content, or we can even talk about judging effect to an extent, is we aim to have judges be the most intelligent, most informed audience member that has ever existed. Right?
That statement intimidated me when I first heard it the first time, and I went, but they're right.
Yeah.
You have to be the most educated person on the whole stadium.
Yeah, you're the audience member that knows more than any other audience member about how all this came together. And so when we look at the romantic approach, I'm just going to read our way around the circle here. Engagement, coordination, interpretation, variety, concept, staging, effect, emotion, roles, and creativity or innovation. These ideas about communication are this romantic approach to content. Is how does the marriage between the different variety and textures and how all the different subcaptions are being utilized, the woodwinds, the brass, the percussion, the full ensemble, how does that also, from a music perspective, is it influenced by the visual? Is it challenged by the visual? Is it enhanced through that? And how all of those things work together. So again, this is going to feel probably the most challenging way to look at content, but I also think the way that our programs can really grow, especially those programs that are advancing from area prelims to area finals, from area finals into state prelims. Now, to give you an even deeper dive, I won't read this one to you because we're going to do a little bit of a kind of a further approach to each one of these, but as we think through it, we can think, I'll just pick the interpretation one, we can think interpretation, how are we showing visual musicality? How is the music being represented visually? Does the visual equate to the music? Does the music equate to the visual? Do they make sense to you? Do they feel like they kind of coordinate together? And all of that falls under the umbrella of how this piece is being interpreted by the marching ensemble.
When I started judging this particular caption, it was something where I was really in the analytical mode and I was kind of going after it. The best advice I received was let the performance come to you in this particular caption. And when I started doing that, I think not that I ignored the analysis aspect of it, I put it a little bit more in perspective. I let it be where, how am I personally being affected? Romantic, I think about emotion right off the bat. How is this affecting me personally? Did you surprise me? Let's say we were using some of the Suite of All American Dances music. you not only played the notes on the page, but you did some embellishments and ornamentations that I didn't see coming, and you made it this really cool technical feature on top of it. We're like, wow, that was really great. It had surprise to it, had variety. It added some elements that it really enhanced it. Took this idea and went even in deeper and had more breadth into it. But yeah, anyway, like those captions moving around that circle, that's something worth kind of thinking through each one of those when you are the live performance is happening.
So there are 10 of these here, and I thought what we might do is just break down the 10 of them and just do a very quick, maybe 1 or 2 minutes. We're going to talk through, ask you some questions on each one, and then Mark and I will kind of reflect, but I want you to also, as we're doing this, perhaps pull up a favorite show in your mind as we're taking you through this. Could be a show that you taught as a band director, could be a show that you judged last year, could be a drum corps show, could be a show that you saw at a Bands for America regional, could be a Winter Guard show you could stretch as far as you want, could be a piece of concert band music. I mean, you could really take this as far as you want and picture something in your mind and maybe walk through the questions with us as you think through something that in your mind, I'll use the term exemplar because we used that earlier when we're listening to a judge recording. Think about an exemplary marching band show, concert band piece, Winter Guard show, what have you, that really kind of holds in your memory and ask these questions about it. Start with engagement. Does the band hold the attention of the audience? I used to say, like, if I could look down and see a bunch of people on their phones, I'm not holding the attention of the audience.
The funny adage of it's a hot dog band. Oh, this is the one we should have gone to the concession stand for.
Right.
You don't want to be that group, but it should be where you are like, what's next? What's next? You are constantly. I can't take my eyes off the field right now.
Well, and sometimes does it hold the attention of the audience? Does it also hold the attention of the judges? Because that's not the same thing. Sometimes things can really grab the audience, but to a judge, you're like, oh, I've kind of seen this. It's not really developing, or as you said, lacks variety, perhaps.
Yeah.
Vice versa, some things really hold on the judges because they're super intellectual, but the audience, it's kind of lost on them, and they're like, wow, you're doing Schwantner on the field. I don't know that I mean, it can, but I think you have to be really careful. Do the events flow logistically? I put this graphic on the bottom of like a comic strip, right? Does one event from a graphic novel type perspective flow to the next? Are you spending too long on one thing before you get to the other? Is that extension and that length of the phrase important to generate that excitement? If it's a double tongue feature that just keeps going and is relentless, that maybe does hold my attention, as opposed to something else that's just like, it feels like you're killing time on this. And then lastly, are there multiple things going on at once? It's okay to have just a singular focus. Is this brass trio with a trio of color guard performers with sabers? Okay, great. Like, that's intriguing to me. I can watch that for a period of time, but is there something else going on? Is the rest of the band doing choreography behind that moment? Does the color guard have something interesting going on side 2 that helps that? So what do you think, like, in terms of engagement?
Engagement. One of the words that comes to mind is pacing. Not only for the audience, they're bored with it, or you're digging in, trying to dig in it deeper than the audience member. There's so few instances in a 7.5 minute show where you get to really develop something. Sometimes it has to be 30 seconds, 45 seconds. We have to get to the next event, or has to get some kind of resolution. If you think about musically, we talk about a cadence point and a musical resolution. That's the same visually. Does it all of a sudden, where there's small groups come together with the full ensemble, a visual resolution? So that's some other terms you could be thinking about. When the directors have chosen to go ahead and develop something a bit longer, look and see, did that really help with the pacing? Did it die things out? Did it kind of plateau? It was like, oh, this is kind of feel like we're just treading water right now. Or did they choose, like, say, the emotion of intensity and tension? Did it crank up the notch of tension? Like, wow, I can't believe this. This is really building. It's adding more and more people. The notes are getting more frenetic, and then it comes to even more of a payoff. That's the things you're looking to try to reward, that they chose to invest those valuable seconds into something that was, okay, this is going to be more developed than anything you've heard so far.
Absolutely. The second one here is coordination. Kind of really playing off of what you just said.
Yeah.
Does it make sense? Do the melodies connect in a logical way? From a pacing perspective, Does it sound like a good piece of music? Okay, I have to be careful how I say this. We've all listened to that piece of concert band music where you get to the end and your brain goes and down because you're like, that concert band piece of music feels a little bit like a marching band piece of music. And that's not necessarily an insult to a concert band piece of music. It just has that energy. By the same, does the marching band, if there were not the visual elements, kind of what you were saying earlier, if the front ensemble weren't there, would the show still work? How about if none of the visual were there? If it was a standstill performance, musically, does it still work? Does it still flow like a good piece of music? Now to put the visual back in, does the drill, the visual, the choreography, the color guard work? Does that also, if we muted out the band and just watched it, would we be like, oh, that's really cool the way that connects into that? In other words, does the music complement the visual? Does the visual complement the music?
Engagement would be the word that comes to mind. Musical, audio engagement as well as visual engagement, and you're hoping that they actually are symbiotic at the same time.
Yeah, I think this is one that we can feel pretty comfortable talking about. I was recently watching a group where the music is really high velocity. Its tempo is above 180. And the step size is very, very small. Yeah. And it was a little bit of a disconnect for me. And again, if that's intentional by the group from a design perspective, but I think it was just done to be safe. Yeah. I think that we have to think through those things and just say the volume of the music, the speed and the velocity are not being matched on the visual front inside of this moment. And so if you're a music judge, you may say something like, again, in that content box, there are descriptors that say things like, does the music match the visual? Does the visual match the music that you hear? That there may be a mismatch. There may be a coordination mismatch inside of it.
A commonplace analogy that we all understand with that when we're watching a movie, does the soundtrack match what the movie is? And sometimes it'll be, wow, what an incredibly dynamic soundtrack, and the movie is kind of blah, it's a dud. Or like this incredible movie that's playing in front of us, this cinematic masterpiece, and then the soundtrack is just a little grade 2 little tiny box sound, and you're looking for that same type of idea that we all, when we go to the movie theater, we're able to understand. That's that hit on all cylinders.
Yeah, that coordination piece is so important. Another one is interpretation, and so this is kind of taking that coordination piece and a little bit of a left turn out of that, which is how does the visual complement the music logistically? In other words, from an interpretation perspective, are the sections being positioned in good spots to be successful? And sometimes those decisions, are they made to challenge us as judges, to challenge the audience, where there might be a brass feature over here a high brass feature over on side 1 that links to a low brass feature on side 2 that's 40 yards away, that does cause us as an audience and as a judging panel to really move our heads, and it's drawing us around the field, and we're feeling like really this interpretation not only challenges me musically in how you're passing time through here, but also offers some visual opportunities because you've chosen these different stages. And then the other side of that is, does the visual complement the music artistically? In other words, if it's legato music, kind of what you were saying about soundtracks, if it's legato music, does it look like legato drill? Yeah. Or if you were asked to write a phrase of drill for something that's really syncopated or really angular, what would you want to make that look like? So thinking about this interpretation thing is a bit like that coordination piece, but kind of taking a slight left turn out of there to go, well, how does that feel with regard to interpretation?
For those of you that are looking for more opportunities to recognize the color guard, think about, let's talk about a legato phrase. The writing still has to have checkpoints, just like legato music has to be played in time together. Looking for different levels. Like if they wrote something a little bit lower, and then at the right key moments, it has that upwards kind of area too. It's more angular. It all of a sudden is a toss. It's something where the work takes them up higher. You're recognizing again the style of work, how they chose to do it. It's something that's facing away. It's something that's facing towards us. The unification, and think about their different writing styles. Can I put you on the spot for a second and talk about this? So let's talk about musically. So let's say they, in an effort for a band to achieve variety, and talking about artistically, traditional concert band piece of music. The next piece they play, it's something that's a lot more visceral and intense. They've chosen to do it, and in turn, they're going to play with very aggressive sounds. So how do you quantify that.
Yeah, I mean, because that's the tricky part, is still 85% of the music sheet is performance.
Yeah.
So you're still having to think about tone quality. You're still having to think about those aspects. So through that lens, I think that you tackle it as there's a tone quality perspective here, but I'm also open to the idea that let's use jazz band, for instance, right? Like, there's an acceptable tone quality I'm a woodwind player, as a saxophonist, that I could use in a concert setting that would be very different in a jazz setting. And so both of those are acceptable. And so if, as a marching ensemble, if I'm choosing to interpret something, not just visually how I said it, but also dynamically or tone quality wise, that we're going to play, let's do Senza Maya, right? The Revueltas, like, can get a little bit aggressive and a little, lots of low brass kind of moments.
Ledge.
I kind of want you to do that. Like, I want to hear you step out. But once I start to hear, again, going back up to the top of the sheet where all those categories are, once I start to hear individuals sticking out of the tone quality. So blend and balance gets distorted a little bit. Once I hear some tone qualities that are maybe not, now all of a sudden I'm going, was that interpretation really worth it? So I think you have to work carefully inside of these very predetermined notions of what is acceptable tone quality, what is an acceptable blend and balance, but then also, as you said, like, you want to interpret things with validity, and if it is something more aggressive, it's okay to lean into that. And so I think as a judge, I think us just being open to that and what that opportunity could be is really cool.
Can I ask you, on the flip side, visually, traditional marching style that accompanies the first thing that's pretty straight ahead. Then they use a non-traditional way to travel.
Yeah.
Maybe it's something that has some theatrics involved. Maybe it has that one. How do you credit that? How is your openness to those?
Yes, I mean, I think it's the same as musical variety. If we march the whole show, which I think we were all doing in the late 90s and early 2000s, we were pretty much just marching drill the whole show. If you march drill the whole show, does that show visual variety from an individual movement standpoint? Not really.
Limited vocabulary.
It limits your vocabulary. And so the opportunity to break free from that. Now, I know where the needle can go too far the other direction. If it's flutter to here, hold for 8, flutter to here, hold for 8, is that variety. Now, you mentioned theatrics. Inside of that, if you're doing a flutter with some choreographic content, so you land in the spot, and maybe you're not playing, maybe it's a solo feature. We talked about a trio of brass with a trio of sabers. We'll go back to that analogy. We have that going on, and then we have these other 100 or so performers that are fluttering to a spot and then doing a choreographic posed kind of moment, and they hold there for a second, and then they break free from that. And in the first flutter, it's just kind of a group dissolve, but in the next one, it's a follow the leader type idea, and maybe the next one, it's a true timed jazz run or something like that. So we're seeing that visual variety just like we would see the music variety. Is, I think, from an interpretation perspective, it opens us up to be able to talk about those things. Again, I advocate for our groups, just marching the whole show. I don't know that that's advantageous anymore. But I also think if you said, hey, we're going to flutter the whole show this year. If a band director called and said, Mark, we're thinking about just getting rid of marching technique in general. We're just going to flutter through the whole show. You'd be like,
I think you're trying to cover something up.
Right. Then you go like, well, that's almost like saying we're going to do a whole show, but we're not going to play any notes in the key of B flat.
We're not going to play any melodies.
Right.
We're going to play just abstract music.
And so then you enter into that. So I think as judges, we have to be open to the idea that some things can be diatonic and sit on our ear really well, and some things can challenge us musically. Same thing, interpretive visual, is that we can break that up a little bit more. And so that open-mindedness, I think, is important in this romantic approach to judging content. So the next one speaks exactly to this. I threw these graphics at the bottom because food gets my attention. Here is variety. There are a number of different ideas presented through the show. Or do we make choices that are unique? Playing the Stars and Stripes solo on tuba rather than on piccolo is an interesting choice. If we have the performer for it, by all means.
All-stater,
is there depth to the ideas? Is the ensemble taking risks, or does it feel very safe all of the time? So I think when we think through variety, much like the food pictured here, there are things that we expect if we go to a party that there's probably going to be some chips and some dip. There's probably going to be some fruit laid out, right? But is there going to be something on that fruit tray that's like, oh, I've never tried this particular thing before.
Right.
I've never, this is a little different, or this is a combination that's unexpected to me. I didn't expect to be able to eat strawberries with cheese, but it actually works really well.
Right.
The same idea is that director taking the opportunity to mix things up, especially where she might have some stronger players in one area, and by the same doing a favor to those that aren't as accomplished.
In your last bullet point of the second question of it is the ensemble willing to take risks, or does it feel safe all the time? Trying to reward them and like, hey, that really paid off, and someone's attempted being innovative and then be able to achieve it at a certain level of excellence. Give it up for them. Say, that was great. I didn't expect that. That worked really, really well. That was neat, and you surprised me. I was, as a judge, sometimes things become very predictable.
Yeah.
Like, here it comes. Oh, we're going to do this, and here's the choreographed moment and the chord structure. But yet you did something, and you spun out a different way, and you went to a different piece of music that went faster.
Yeah.
It's like, give it up for them if all of a sudden the excellence is there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But variety is really important to ours as well. Creativity and innovation. Is this a new idea or a new twist on an old idea? I mentioned in our previous session to our new judges, when we did the first set of these videos, we were down in San Antonio. We were talking with a panel, and I think it was Jody Rhodes who mentioned, if you're going to do Rhapsody in Blue and bring out an orange flag, I'm going to have some questions. I'm curious. I'm not going to necessarily write it off and say that's wrong. It's maybe not wrong. It's maybe just something you're trying to show, a juxtaposition. In other words, does the pairing of the music with the visual feel standard, or is it innovative? Is it fresh? Are you taking something and turning it on its ear? Again, we're in the romantic approach to judging content, and we're thinking about creativity and innovation. I'll tell this quick story. We had years ago, when I was teaching at the cadets, the drum major of the 1934 cadets.
Wow.
This was probably the year 2007. We had him come to a rehearsal, and we were in California, and he lived in California, and we asked, what's the most surprising thing about drum corps that you see now that in the 1930s was just, and he said, you march backwards. I never would have thought people would have marched backwards.
Right.
Now, we don't think of that as innovative
standard
at all. You're just like, marching backwards? Like, to him, that was really innovative. Somewhere along the way, somebody said, hey, let's try baritones. Why don't you march backwards on this? And it just blew everyone's mind.
Yeah.
There are groups in Texas that are that innovative, that are kind of forging new ground and trying new things, and our openness as judges to not immediately look at it and go, well, I wouldn't have done it that way, so that's wrong. Instead to go, wow, you're pushing the envelope here.
This circles back to your comment about being the smartest person in the audience, and it's challenging and a little bit intimidating. Back to Jody's comment about the Rhapsody in Blue, having a little bit of knowledge of how the color wheel lays out. Okay, so what is the opposite color on the spectrum? It is orange. And understanding, I see what you did there, and understanding you're trying to do a complete dichotomy, and think of the word juxtaposition. Maybe it's like taking just the traditional Rhapsody in Blue, but I'm going to give you this visually idea that is the exact opposite of it. And then let's say if it's like, wow, that really, really worked, understanding the depth of that one. Having a little bit of, you got to dabble in a little bit of the areas, understanding kind of where they're coming from, of taking an idea and trying to put it on its head.
I love this idea of creativity and innovation, and that in our romantic approach to judging content. The next is concept. Is there a storyline to the show? There doesn't have to be. Please don't misunderstand me. Is there an arc of development, some sense of development as the show grows? Are there clear ideas? Maybe there's not a storyline, but maybe you're strolling through an art gallery. Maybe you're seeing, we sometimes see art galleries do this, where they're going to take different images of a moment in history. They're going to take Noah's Ark and they're going to picture it 9 different ways. Right? And we're going to see a very postmodern version of it. We're going to see a very classical version of it. We might see a pointillist version of it. We might see this very angular kind of version of it. Note that a theme is not required, but if you didn't know the theme or the title of the show, let's just say the announcer went to announce the name of the show and their microphone cut out right as they said it. They said, presenting the ABC Marching Band and their 2024 competition show. Please welcome. And you were like, oh gosh, I didn't hear what it was. do you still know what the show is about? Are you able to look at some of the context clues on the field, be it done through the flags that are being used, the music that's being performed? You go, oh, this is all music of Spain.
The association of it.
Yeah, this is all music from Spain, or this is all, music about water, or something like that. Would you still find it interesting musically and visually? And so this is not to say that in judging this concept piece of the content wheel that we have to think through a prop or a custom flag or a uniform top, but just does it have a sense of unity, and does everything speak to the concept throughout the 7 or so minutes that they're on the field?
This will date myself, but back in the late 70s, early 80s, it was the Spanish opener, and it was the standstill production number. Usually, here's Tico Tico that's in there somewhere, and then there's some kind of percussion piece, and then Battle Hymn of the Republic. It could work together if under the overall umbrella it was Americana, for instance, and you're thinking about, I'm going to use Stars and Stripes, but it's in a Latin feel, but then there's Battle Hymn in a traditional sense, but it's got a soloist in different ways. It can still happen, but back then we loved the variety, but it's okay to have the variety, but yet it all kind of is all going the same direction. It's not like, wow, that was very obtuse, and that was a whole different direction, but yet it all kind of fits under something that's loosely tied together. And some people are like, hey, we are going to die on this hill. This is exactly the show we're going to go with, and we're going to keep in this very narrow dystopian idea. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's like, hey, this is a narrow thing. Does it have the variety that we're looking for with something that's another area?
Well, we've all seen the movie where it starts by following 4 different characters, and you're like, how are these things related? But somehow in the end, it all comes together in a moment of unity. I'm okay with that as a judge. If I see the first piece and I go, oh, wow, that was great. It was Tico Tico. I didn't expect that. Right. And then that's Battle Hymn of the Republic. Okay, I'm not sure where we're going yet. Right. But if it all kind of resolves to one moment. And so I think, again, in this romantic approach to content, how have they chosen to bring a concept to life that is engaging to you as, again, to use the term, the most intelligent, the most educated audience member? Does it bring a new perspective? Does it offer you a visit with an old friend and a concept or a perspective that you've liked, that you've seen before? Kind of in that same vein, how about what are the roles the performers are playing, and do these roles engage the audience and or the judges? In other words, what's the scale of the role that's there? Is it all of the woodwinds are... we're going to do a show about good and evil and angels and demons, and all the woodwinds are dressed in white and they're the angels, and all the brass are dressed as demons, and there's a color guard performer that's in gold that kind of links them up and does the battle and whatnot. Do those roles feel realistic? Are they artificial? Are they campy? And that's not to say that you can't have a really cute, silly role that definitely resonates with you, but when we think about playing Mozart, there's a certain look to the band that they're going to have in Mozart. As opposed to, if we're going to go back to our Dixieland idea, there's a certain visual aesthetic, certain musical aesthetic even, and just how we approach the music that changes when we're in Dixieland all of a sudden.
Using your Suite of All American Dances concept, the visually, let's say it's a theatrical role, the term, we don't want it to look like a third grade play on there. We've all been there, and we some of us are still living that. We're hoping it has some depth to it. That would be an arranged version. Okay, it's there. It doesn't have a lot of depth. Yeah, they're kind of wearing the right costume, but that's not really the role, and they look real stiff. Versus the training, we've chosen a theatrical role, and one of the best examples I can think about is sometimes you have that great student performer that just knows how to improv, and then they feature them, and you're going, I would pay money in a professional club to hear that person play, and they know how to feature them, versus someone who's trying to improv and like they sound pretty good on their instrument, but it's real stiff, it sounds overly analytical, but those kind of areas. Same way theatrically, they look trained, they come across, they're captivating, they look me in the eye, they're able to make that happen, versus I'm just going to put this costume on and I'm going to have a very weak arm gesture and then kind of put it back down.
Right.
To the depth of it where it gets to be, is it artificial / campy?
Does it feel natural? Does it
Yeah.
feel organic? And so, take a look at those roles and ask, what is the music assigned? Again, back to, does the overall design look like the music? But also, do the roles the performers are playing, be they color guard performers, woodwind, brass, percussion, what have you, do they also match with what you're hearing? If that were the soundtrack, does that soundtrack match the individual actors
Right.
and what their mood looks like inside of that moment? Don't worry, we're getting to the end. If you're like, oh my gosh, this is a lot to think about, guys. And I hope if you've held in your mind perhaps that major show that you liked, and you can go back through my slides and just kind of think through that exemplary show that you really loved and ask yourself, did it have all the, and you're going to probably find that it checked a lot of boxes. Emotion. Do the performers commit to the emotion of the moment? Kind of to use what we were just talking about, if we hear a student play a really wonderful, they play the Schubert Ave Maria as a flute solo or a flugelhorn solo,
yeah.
and it's very just metronomic. Like you can almost hear the metronome clicking in the kid's head at each one, and you just kind of go, it's a wonderful tone quality. When I think about the top of the sheet, it's a wonderful tone quality. It's a great sense of maybe there's some articulation ideas there that are really well done. There's some flow and some dynamics that work well for you, but does it have the emotion you're looking for? Does it have presence on the field musically and visually? Is it conveying, for example, I chose some characters here that we're familiar with in the Disney world. Does it convey sadness? Does it convey joy? Does it convey anger? Whatever it needs to say.
Terms that always come to my mind, and actually sometimes I write this down on the sheet to remind myself about it. Did the performer or performers deliver and sustain the role? It's easy to introduce a role, but when the phrase gets to be longer, whether it's getting louder or just in sheer length of adding phrases on, are they continuing to be convincing? That presence on the field, it's that kind of wow factor, but can they keep drawing me in? Can they keep sustaining that role over and over, whether it be something intense, or I want to draw you into this melancholy kind of idea, and I'm still showing you how intimately I could play this versus, okay, I just have to now all of a sudden start playing at the very end.
Yeah,
Takes a lot of maturity. It really does.
It does, and I think finding those opportunities for emotion, for me as a band director, always started with my soloists and making sure I had that, and then we would move to the small ensemble moments and draw out some there. And it took a while to get the full ensemble to play with some sense of emotional connection because we're spread so far out on the field, where all of the things that we know that we're struggling with. We have two more, so stay with us here. Effect. Effect can sometimes be viewed as, in the state of Texas, as like, this is too touchy-feely, this is too whatever. But I think it's something that we as judges have to consider is, does the audience react to the musical moment? And I'm not talking about the moms and dads in front of you with the jingly cowbells. Like, they're going to react, but like...
They know all the spots.
They're right. Does the parent from the other school... Like, you can see that the ABC band is on the field, but the XYZ parent is sitting right there. Do they also go, that's good?
Give it up.
Like, I don't want this band to be ahead of our band at area, but it's really good. So does the audience react to the musical moment? Do they react to the visual moment? And understanding that a reaction, I know I just kind of modeled applause for you. Maybe it's not applause. Maybe it's just hushed reverence. Maybe it's a laugh because that's what they wanted to get out of you. Maybe it was an excitement. Maybe it was a standing ovation. Sure. Inside of all of those things, are we generating that sense of reaction from the audience? Are they walking away from our show not just having heard music and seen a bunch of shapes and colors on the field, but did they also have something from a moment perspective that resonated with them?
I like that. Everything on the slide, everything we talked about so far, but especially this particular area, doesn't use the word props. And it could be void of anything like that. It could help accentuate it. It could be the centerpiece. It could be a really neat backdrop. But I think when there was an adage not many years ago but effect was how much stuff are you bringing on the field. And again, this is a live performance, students bringing the show to life, how it's been designed. Some of those added elements, furniture on the field, can only kind of accentuate, but it has nothing to do with hushed reverence and laughter.
Yeah.
You know, that prop's not going to do that. It's the performers and how they're being able to interact with the audience members.
Well, I chose this ending of the Rocky movie as an image to share here.
Yeah, it's great.
What's the one prop that's used here? An American flag.
Yep.
You know, but does that, and I'm hoping that most of our judges have seen that movie in your lifetime, or over on the right hand side is, you know, obviously a historical group of kids
Beatles,
either watching Elvis or the Beatles or something like that. There was nothing. I mean, set design wasn't a consideration. You know, there's no props or anything like that. What those folks are excited about is human achievement.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that the greatest generation of effect is through human achievement. And I would put a Texas spin on it, human achievement with a high degree of precision, right?
Exactly.
From a marching band perspective.
Right.
Like that's what will wow our audiences. And so I think it's so important as a judge that we understand that effect through the idea of it's about a reaction to a moment. If I just parked my set pieces out there and then there was a rain delay, I don't know that you're going to generate much emotion, right? But if all of a sudden it was a really windy day and they chose not to use their props in a show, but we still did it, that sense of human achievement is really what resonates with us as judges. Last one, staging. Are people placed well on the field? When you think about content, how did they, number one, are they placed well for those moments? And sometimes they're placed in challenging areas to challenge us as adjudicators,
right,
to challenge the audience, to open our eyes more. There was a scene with a drum corps last season, maybe season before last, it kind of happens every season, I feel like, where they pull the entire drum corps to the back side one or side two corner, and it really does force you to just kind of see that empty field and that just, you know, there's a challenge to it. But also, as we were talking about earlier, how do they get to those places? You know, did they just flutter to it? Was there something choreographic? Did they march to it?
Did all the lines fold in? Fold it back there?
And if they are using a prop, you're not just parking it out there, but that prop is being utilized. The placement makes sense. It's utilized to further the concept. It's not like you just put up 4 flats in the back that had, you know, pictures of, you know, fruit on it, and you went, well, yeah, the show's about Candy Crush or whatever. And I'm like, how am I supposed to get that that's what you were trying to say to me if you don't reference it? And I think that's the double-edged sword to the staging piece, and maybe even into the prop conversation we were just having, which is, if you're going to put these set pieces out, if you're going to do that, that staging is important. But then also, where you choose to place these musical moments, you don't always put the important musical thing on the 50-yard line, 8 steps behind the front sideline, but that you do, just like in a theatrical play, and I put 2, you know, kind of images here to get you to think about that, that you do create a little bit of an openness and get the audience to move their necks around a little bit, look to the left, look to the right, take things in a little more.
To show a visual comparison or relationship, let's say you're walking through an art gallery, and like you said, things are centered, here it is, it's proper perspective. You get up this painting, and it's large, and it's void of color, except for like an image, like a circle in the upper left-hand corner. I bet you would stop and really study it. I really think you would, thinking about how a football field is related to that painting. Why did he choose? Why did the artist choose to put everything in one area with so much negative space? Is it represented? Then you look at the title of it, and you're seeing isolation or something. You're going, okay, it really draws you in. Again, did that designer choose to say, our theatrical stage, which is 100 yards, I'm going to do this now. I have to consider acoustics and traveling and be able to get there. But that really set up a really achieving moment where they environmentally took me to a place, and literally I'm watching the journey now unfold after, for instance. So.
Absolutely. So we've kind of brought you through the full idea of all things related to not only a classical but also a romantic approach to how we judge content. It's my hope that you've been equipped now in this first hour of our training with some new ideas and some new thoughts about your approach to judging content. With that, we're going to take our first quiz. This quiz is going to be required of all of our veteran judges as well as our new judges. If you'll take that first quiz, we'll have you do that now, and we'll be back with you in just about 1 minute. Welcome back, everybody. We hope you did well on the quiz. We're going to dive right into another exemplar. So as you remember, we started our conversation today with a quick exemplar. All of these files are available for you in the folder. So we're just giving you 1-minute snippets, but I do want to explain the full 7, 8, 9, 10-minute, however long the recorded file is. All of those are available for you in that folder to listen to. So I would encourage you, as you're getting closer to that first area assignment, take a listen to it. Just go through and, as you're exercising, as you're walking to and from, as you're driving home in your car, put one on, because I think there's something to be said for an exemplar that you're not emotionally connected to.
Right.
It's not your band. It's not, you're kind of listening to it and you just kind of go like, oh, I like the way they say that. You can disconnect a little bit from some of it and take that on. And so with this, we're going to dive into Beth Fabrizio doing a music exemplar. So let's take a listen to Beth's exemplar.
Yeah, but again, lead right into it and then maintain that consistency of the vibrato right in. Yeah, love the opportunity to showcase our trumpets. Make sure that we're really playing within each other's sounds, trumpets, so that tone color just really carries. It's a little bit thin at times, which means we're either playing with a little bit of pressure or we're closing down the aperture embouchure. You know what you do really, really smartly is you really work the structure and the timbre and textural opportunity of the battery along with the instrumentation that you utilize, and it's really intelligently done from a staging perspective as well as a dynamic and scoring perspective. Tone color trumpets as we complete that idea. Same thing here, the length of note. Yeah, when it rings, doesn't it? Which means, again, those are those moments that we're allowing things to really, really be there. Yeah, the only thing I would say I'm not sure that we need to use quite so much of is rim shots in here. Yeah, it's a great opportunity to really, from a clarity perspective, right? And then continue that carrying that phrase over with the resonance. Again, this is really, it's not a terribly tough environmental challenge for you, but the listening environment does change. So we need to make sure that we understand how we fit within those moments, but again, to continue to explore those colors from a standpoint of phrasing and dynamic structure is so, so important. But some of the things that you do from a standpoint of scoring with the battery and the winds and brass, very intelligently done.
No one could ever accuse Beth of not listening, but she is quoting them. She's singing back what's happening. And the first thing I think about, first of all, they're very positive. Like, she's recognizing, like, that's great, and do this too, and how you wrote this for the percussion with content. Not only is she analyzing, but you tell she's got her pedagogy hat on. She's diagnosing. She's like, here's what I think you need to do to fix it. Here's what I think's actually causing that area. What a great educational tape, in addition to, I recognize this, and you do this really well, and you do this really well. But you also know where you stand with her. Like, hey, it's kind of closing down right here, and I think this is kind of what's causing that problem.
Well, and coming off of the long content conversation we just had, you heard her use terms like staging. We had her talking about variety. We had her talking about, even though she may not have used the direct words, but kind of she got into interpretation a little bit. And so, as you make your way through it, it was not just a balance of what was being performed, how it was being performed, but there was a little bit of what you could do to make that better, given the opportunity. And I forget if this is a prelims or finals or where it is, but even some good advice there to try and help further that along in the future, whether that be a finals performance or going into next year. So
that's great.
Yeah, let's talk about managing numbers a little bit. So when I mentioned to you earlier that the two biggest kind of feedback pieces that we got from all of you and as well from the directors had to do with how we talk about content, which we spent the first hour on, and the second piece from a lot of our judges said, I could still use some help with how I manage my numbers over the course of the day. So we're going to spend the next hour or so just talking about numbers management and how we manage our numbers over the course of the day. Now, I'm going to show you this. If you have done the region training with me over the past 4 years and now with Andy Seeley, you're going to remember that we talk about rating and ranking, understanding the current paradigm, the sheets, the philosophy behind the sheets, and we use that cycle of impression, analysis, comparison, right? You remember that from region. When we go to area, we add these additional 5 tools, and Mark and I are going to talk you through all 5 of these tools just to give you a better understanding of what they are. I'm just going to list them real quick, but using the thirds of the box, numerical scale, value of a tenth, subcaption integrity, and subcaption profiling. We're first going to talk about using thirds, and I'll tell you, we'll go ahead and talk through each one, then we'll listen to a little bit of an exemplar, we'll go back and do some reflection, and then we'll dive back in. So about 8 to 10 minutes on each one of these concepts for you. We have to remember that the box is divided into thirds. I've drawn the picture for you here of what, this is a 300-point box. Each box is a little different, but the thirds are divided proportionally the same. We call the boxes box 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, or they're named rarely, sometimes, usually, consistently, and always. We have thirds inside of the box, and there are numerical divisions that show you where the thirds fall. So for example, there in consistently, I can see that consistently runs from roughly 210 to 270. It's a 60-point box, so each third is about 20 points. So 210 to 230 is the lower third, 230 to 250 is the middle third, 250 to 270 is the upper third. When we see a group, we use scoring specific language like consistently or usually, and then inside of that we get even more specific by saying, are they consistently consistent, middle of the box,
right,
usually consistent, bottom of the box, almost always consistent, top third of the box. So we're starting here with the lower third of the box, which I've called emergence. I'm just going to read to you what's here. Emergence is a bridge, that lower third of the box is a bridge between the next lower box and the current box. The band will display most of the components within that descriptive box. However, there may be a few components that belong to that. Again, we were talking consistently. You may have a few things that trickle over, and you caught yourself using the word usually a few times. As a judge, you might actually be unclear early on as to if they're going to belong in box 3 or box 4, but as you continue to evaluate, you're like, no, they're definitely in box 4, but they're also not securely in the middle of 4. They show some tendencies of box 3. So anything you want to say on the lower third?
I think the concept of the thirds, it was a game changer to me when we really said, okay, this gives me not only I'm looking for you to be in this particular box consistently, usually, it was even the other smaller silo that I could kind of compartmentalize some different groups, thinking about if a group is usually doing something, but then whether it's one skill that, like, let's say it's articulation musically, or let's say it's individual marching technique, it's like, wow, that's really good from group to group, and there's so many more things right about it. It has more of a consistent vein to it. That's where it's in the emergence. Like, boy, that's starting to pop up into the next level. It's showing great promise on several skills that are kind of popcorning up there.
Absolutely. Now, when we move into that middle third, we call this realization. Yeah. This band displays all of the attributes of that box in that particular, and again, remember, these boxes exist for subcaptions. So let's just say we're talking woodwinds, right? They are in the middle of that for nearly all of the descriptors, the tone quality, the blend and balance descriptor. To be in the middle third, they don't have a lot of distinction toward the upper. They're not leaning, again, we've been talking consistently, they're not leaning into always yet. It's not, there were not a lot of times where you as your judge said always this, always that, but they also didn't show a lot of usually. They felt very cemented in the center of consistency. Your
address is strongly planted in this area.
Anything else about the realization in the center?
Again, in terms, I know a lot of times we're using different words in different ways. We're not talking about box 3.
Right.
We're talking about every box has thirds to it. So now we're talking about the lower, the middle, and the high of each of those. So 15 different little compartments.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then the final third is what we would call fulfillment, which is some of the components are displayed with a distinction that leads toward the next higher box. So again, remember we did that consistently, the 20 point, 20 point, 20 point across the 60 there. This is that 250 to 270 range and consistently, or that 170 to 210 range and usually, where they're showing that brass section is showing trends toward always, but they're not quite. I mean, every time you listen to, let's say, an 8-measure phrase, 7 of those measures are there, but there's like one little thing inside of each one that's like, guys, I can't click always yet. We're still inside of the consistency bubble.
Yeah, you're on the verge. You are so ready to break through, but like you said before, it's always one element. Maybe it's the phrase length. We just can't finish our air all the way across. We just can't get. There's so many times the articulation's great, except like, wow, we're trying to play lifted notes, and then there's individuals just ever so often that play longer than everyone else. Like, you can't really say the word always. It's like it's well over the majority, but we're just not quite there.
Yeah, I kind of call that upper part of box 4 is almost always, you know, or I call the upper part of box 3 like it's almost consistent. You know, it's just, and we've heard our groups in, September. September is a very almost consistent, kind of usually the trumpets play this together, but we go to a football game on Friday night and it's suddenly not together. And so, that could kind of help. I've often shared that this tool is really neat with your section leaders. And again, I know many of you who are on our discussion today are also active band directors.
Sure.
Have you handed this to your section leaders and said, hey guys, I want you all to go to talk with the trumpet section and let's get a feel for how do we do in terms of tone quality tonight? Were we really consistent? Well, how do we do in terms of articulation and timing? Were we, and so it gives you an opportunity to talk through those, and those students will even help guide where those boxes look. Were we consistently consistent? Were we bordering on always? Were we bordering on usually? Again, you've got a lot of points to work with, so we hope that this use of thirds will really help you kind of narrow down. Once that performance is over, that you can begin to say, based on the language I used, I felt like my language fell to the woodwinds here, to the brass here, to the percussion here. The
broad brush stroke now becomes a little bit more of a finer point each time that we're trying to narrow down the exact number.
Absolutely. And so with that, we're going to jump into another musical exemplar. This is Darren Davis, who is a Broken Arrow, and we hope you enjoyed Darren Davis's exemplar.
So really strong blend with the synthetic sounds with that of the amplified musicians downstage, both in the wind section and in the front ensemble. Yeah. Excellent demonstration of virtuosity in the coloring of the reeds with that of the flutes. And then the amplified ensemble downstage might be a little much in the upstage percussion with respect to balance. So just to make that a seamless musical tapestry. Certainly warm here in the musical iterations of the Tootie Wind Ensemble. Yeah, maybe perhaps that crescendo could just develop a little bit more fully. A strong sense of musical resonance here, however. The sonority here is really terrific. Certainly a long duration with respect to the length of the phrase. Students do a very good job of maintaining that intensity and engagement throughout the duration. Perhaps there's just a minor dip as far as the quality of sound at the right edge of this previous sustained note.
Circling back to our first hour conversation about letting the performance come to you, I noticed there was a big moment where he wasn't talking over it, really synthesizing what was happening. It was full ensemble moment, and then he had several astute comments to say right after it.
Yeah, really and talk to the reeds, talk to the brass, talk to the percussion, talk to the electronics. Kind of got through all of that, and not only thought about the balance and the proportion of things, but also the fulfillment of the crescendo. And did that happen the right way? Did it happen in a way that was fulfilling, to what it needed to be? But it is tempting when the bands get to those really big moments to talk over. And if there's a lesson that I've learned in just pulling all of these exemplars out, is that our very best judges are good about letting those really big 2D ensemble moments. As a music judge, visually too, you're getting a lot of information in that moment. And so talking through that, I think, can sometimes be detrimental to the adjudication process. Instead, just the opportunity to relax, let it come to you, just kind of listen to everything, look at the environment they're in, how far apart are they, how are they set, just in reference to staging, and then what's being asked of the performers in terms of nuance, in terms of shaping. Are they all playing a very similar rhythm? Is there a whole lot of, rhythmic complexity to the phrase? Just not being too afraid to go after those things. So I thought that was a really good one. I'm going to follow it up with a second music exemplar here. We have several to play for you. This is Mark Hoskins and another music exemplar. So let's check this one out.
Get off to work, baritone tubas. Don't rush the do-dee-do-dee-do-dee. Very complex here. It's changing the listening environment. Way to recover on that pulsation. Make sure that seemed just junk getting to the impact. Just seemed like we lost the rhythmic focus leading to the this last segment here. Appreciate the change in dynamic. Good impact, good release point. Dense set here. Make sure to listening. Make sure we understand the quality of sound within that dense moment. Really cool, intense music. We just got to make sure that the complexity of the rhythms in that last production, we just make sure as the tubas are rolling through and boom, 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 boom. Great articulation and clarity there. The melodic content coming against that we don't crush the rhythmic values, so we can keep that as vertical as possible, so that when we get to the blow away, we have that sense of unity. It didn't seem like it was as locked in today as you would like. And then as we condense this form at the end, just make sure we're looking for the beauty of sound, the quality of sound at that top dynamic as we conclude the production. Love the product. I love the show. I love the variety. I love the complexity within the written book. Now I just got to get in and just get a little bit more clarity and focus, just to dot those I's and cross all those T's, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate the effort. Again, congratulations on your inclusion in the finals finals format. I wish you all the best. Take care.
Mark is such a great musician, and you could tell he was very involved, and I loved it because I loved the show. He was calling it like it was. He said, maybe it's not the best version of our performance, understanding there's probably something in the future they're going to be performing towards. How encouraging was it that he was giving that information, listening closely, this is great, hinting towards the performers, you got to keep sustaining. You have to keep sustaining this role, whether it's something with volume. We're going to play with beauty. He was talking about the subjectivity in that area, but giving them several little key points, not only technically but also artistically, that they really should be focusing on for future performances.
Well, and I appreciate as well just the pedagogical information. That he was going through, like diagnosing the problems in not only what he was hearing, but also in mindset. And I think you were kind of hinting at that as well. He's talking to the performers about mindset, and we were talking about listening and pulsing and making sure that and he even said, I don't know that went as well as you wanted it to today. I think that a veteran judge can appreciate what a moment is supposed to be, what the architecture was supposed to look like and sound like, but how it ended up coming across to help a group grow forward and be even stronger.
He's a great example, and I don't know exactly what numbers he put down, but I know he didn't dump them.
No.
He was talking about constructive. He was giving that really critical, deeper dive on what was happening. But yet, man, this is advanced. Man, this is good. Man, this has got some great moments. Knowing that it's going to be consistently, and it's always, and it's somewhere living in that area. What the vehicle they've chosen to do is a state-of-the-art idea, but he's also like saying, hey, I know you want to be at this level. Yeah. Let me challenge you to go to the next level.
Absolutely. We're going to dive back into our scoring and just kind of summarizing the process and talking about numbers management with a concept we refer to as numerical scale. In numerical scale, we know that we have 1,000 points to work with in UIL. If you've judged in some other formats, you know that 1,000 is a very generous amount of points to work with. And so I thought that we might share with you a tool that we've found useful. You don't have to use this verbatim as we explain it, but perhaps it could give you a paradigm or a system that you could dive into judging a 30-ish band area prelims to feel secure that you're not going to end up in that last block with quite a numbers headache.
Right.
So this is what we found. Now, first I'll mention that there are some digital scoring resources located on the document and on the link that's shared. Feel free to play with those, download your own copy. If you're more of a paper person, you can print them out in color or in black and white and just kind of have fun. Let's say that the contest has 28 bands and it's 7 bands divided across 4 blocks. What I tend to like to do is to limit myself, because UIL is based on ordinals, I like to limit myself to make sure that I have room later by using only numbers that end in 0. And we were just talking about middle third, bottom third, top third of boxes. I promise there are zeros inside of all of those boxes,
Right.
multiple zeros inside of them. To limit myself to zeros from a bottom line total. So again, you could still use 2 5s or a 3 and a 4, I suppose, if you wanted to, but generally that we're going to have scores that end in 0. That allows you, across the 1,000 points, that allows you 100 different, for 7 bands, that allows you 100 different scoring possibilities. So you're still not limited. If you're like, oh Jerry, that scares me, I don't know if you have enough. Okay, you have 100 different slots that end in a 0. So go ahead and take the opportunity here to use that first block and use numbers that end in 0. So I did 10 bands here for our example. I said 7, but I don't know, we could play 10 now, right? 10 bands, and look, all my numbers ended in 0. The first band had a 760, then a 640. There's a big old 940 in there. There's also a 450 in there. I was able to gap those groups well, and when you look at my recap, I know that's really small, but you can see on the screen where those little black bars are. That's where I've slotted groups. Now, I still have, again, let's say, I guess I built this example out on 40. There's 30 bands left to go. Am I going to be okay? I think I am, but let's keep an eye on it. Block number 2 comes around, and now I can continue to use my zeros. I've kept that, but I can also use any number that ends in 5. So now we have 200 slots available. The 100 zeros, obviously, minus the first block of bands, and any of the numbers ending in 5. So again, we're 20 bands in, and we have 200 slots that we can utilize over the course of the sheet to find our zeros and 5s and make sure that we get things slotted. So when we look at that, there's block number 2. You see I did a 705, a 625. In band 14, I used a 430 because I didn't use that number previously. I used a 960 because I hadn't used that. So I'm still using my zeros but using my 5s. And now you can see my tote kind of looks like this. Again, everybody's pretty spread out. I am not feeling any tension anywhere on this sheet.
You alluded to the word spread out, and this is where in the judging language use the word spreads. Like again, there's intentional gaps. There's a spread of area where I can put this person here or this group here. This one is so close to this one, but I still have room right underneath them or right above them.
Yeah, and we're going to dive into like kind of what those spreads and making sure that you feel like your spreads have meaning as we get to this next. Yeah. And this scale model, I think, will ensure your success. The third block, we can use zeros, 2s, 5s, and 7s. We've always had 0s and 5s. So let's say in the middle of there, we went to lunch. We looked at our recap. We're like, all right, our tote, we're doing okay so far. 0s and 5s. Great. In this next block, I'm going to have 0s and 5s still available to me, but I'm also going to have numbers ending 2s and 7s. I have 400 slots available on the sheet, and after my third block, 30 bands in, you see I've still used some zeros, I've got some 5s, I've got some 2s, I've got some 7s. I actually used a lot of zeros to start that because I was able to, and that was where those groups were slotting for me. And so again, I look at my recap, feeling great. No big anxious points inside of here at all.
Space all around everyone.
With 10 bands left to go, I mean, I almost have 10 bands of room between every number, you know, so I feel pretty spread out here. In that last block, all numbers available. Right, everything's wide open, and I can use any number that I want. So with that, there's literally 1,000 points available, and so at the end of that block, there's how I look. at things, and then on the tote sheet, everything very spread out. If I did kind of read through my ordinals and I looked and I went, I think those need to, you've got plenty of room to move things around inside of this numerical scale model. So while everything is mean reference with 1,000 points, you should still be able to do middle third of the box, top third of the box, bottom third, make sure everybody's in their appropriate box. But inside of that, if you use some sort, this is the system I like, so I'm just sharing this with you, you're going to feel a whole lot better about how you place things. Okay, so go ahead.
Does this pertain only to the bottom line numbers?
Yeah.
Would you do anything if it was I had my brass, my woodwind, etc.?
You can. We're going to talk in a little while about getting those subcaptions profiled and lined out really well. In the zeros, obviously, you need numbers to end in 0, or if you use 5, you have to use 2 5s kind of thing. So you do have to play that numbers game.
Yeah.
When you get into the 2s and the, you can kind of just move a number by 1 click or 2 clicks to make sure. Competition Suite's going to total it all out for you, so that makes life easy. Let me show you an example of a judge who just kind of went hog wild and just put down numbers and crossed their fingers that it would all
could have been my sheet here.
work out. No. You could see at the end of the first block, spread out.
Yep.
End of the second block, we've already got some tension right there. We didn't have anything that tight in the previous version, but you can see they've gone to lunch, and this is toward the top of their group, they've got some stuff that's already really cozy. And now we go to that block after lunch, and we've literally, if we need to slot 2 bands between that 3rd and 4th place group, so sorry, there's no room for you anymore. Yeah. And we get into the end, and that's what our sheet looks like. And you can see as you look at the tote on the left side or the zoom in on the right side, there are so many moments where it's just like, is that really out of 1,000 points you were able to ascertain that so closely? Again, this is a judge who went into it without and this is a real recap, without having a paradigm in place. Yeah. Okay? So I think have a system. I like the 0s, 5s, 2s, 7s, and then all open system. But if you want to do something a little different because that works with with the way that kind of your brain perceives those numbers, that's fine. But I really want you to think about how you build out and use this numerical scale model.
I think unfortunately, we were all learning numbers management. Like you look on the example on the right, we've been there, and I've been there. Of like, that's not exactly the story I want to be told. Like, I really don't think, this band is that much better. I had nowhere else to go. I was boxed in, and that's not fair. Like, you want to do the best job possible, tell the exact story, not like approximate, but I want to give myself the best chance, and thinking ahead of time, constantly referring back and giving yourself benchmarks along the way of, I'm not going to be overly excited with this one, but again, I'm going to keep analyzing. So when I put those numbers in that area, I am going to be able to say I potentially could handle 3 groups easily and still tell the exact story that I want to be told.
Yeah, and so you can almost use this as a workflow, kind of making your way through and going, I used my thirds. I determined what third of the box they were in. I used that numerical scale to know first block ending 0s and 5s, ending 2s and 7s, ending et cetera, et cetera. I made my way through there, and then I can we're going to continue to just like help you winnow things down to get those numbers just exactly perfect on the numbers management front. But the next concept we're going to talk about is the value of a tenth. Now, this is kind of a misleading term because the value of a tenth almost implies that we're scoring them out of maybe 100 points instead of 1,000. So you're going to see that this title, it's kind of traditionally known in the judging community as value of a tenth, but it's a little bit more blown out than that in our 1,000-point system. The value of a tenth is only applying to the bottom line number. We're not going to get into the subcaption numbers. So we're not just talking woodwinds or brass, individual movement or individual marching. We're talking about the bottom number out of 1,000, but it's a tool to provide you with gaps that are appropriate in between the groups so that you can not only set yourself up for success, but also I think it sends a message to groups to kind of know where things are for you. So let me give you kind of 4 overarching ranges that you can work within. If you put groups, again, we're talking about 1,000 points within 60 points of each other, they are very similar. They are probably sharing the same box. They're probably inside of consistently. One might be more in the middle, one might be more toward the bottom, but they're inside of that box what you're saying when you put them within that small range out of 1,000 to one another, or if you want to think in terms of 100 points, this is 6 points out of 100, right?
Okay.
If you want to move that decimal over one, we're talking about they'll have different strengths in individual boxes for you, but let's just say that you saw them in prelims. You were judging music in prelims, and you're that judge that stays on music in finals. In your mind, they could switch places with a better performance from the lower group and maybe a slightly not as good performance from the other group. Within that, they're close. And so I graphically represented them for you here to show you they're not only in the same column on the tote, they're not only in the same upper half, bottom half, they're like within the same third of a column. That's how close these groups are. So, these are, when we look back at our previous examples of numerical scale, if you remember in that first block, I don't know that we had very many groups that were this close to each other.
No.
Yeah.
You hear in judge speak language the term neighborhoods. This is where the neighborhoods come in mind, where not only do you live on the same street, you live on the same side of the street, you live right next door to each other, so many houses down, not one street over, and then you can see these natural groupings that start happening of this is the competitive part of the contest, and then, I've got to still decide right here towards the bottom, there's going to be someone who has to be in the finals, and I've got to really decide in that neighborhood who's really my go-to group.
Yeah, to use your analogy, they both live in the Box 4 subdivision, and they are both on Green Avenue in the Box 4 subdivision, right? So that's what we're saying is like these are groups that are nearly in the same box with one another, in the same third of the same box with one another. That's how close and tight they are in the neighborhood. So again, I like to think of these as like if I saw them again in finals,
they could flip-flop.
They could flip very easily with just show of the day. Now, this next spread opens things up a little more. This would be groups that have an identifiable kind of a narrow difference. There'd be some very nuance between the groups. If I think about it this way: if the contests were held a week later, let's say we have prelims, and it rains for a straight week,
Houston,
right, and then we come back a week later and we have finals, that there's a chance they could flip. But prelims to finals, we're not going to see motion between these two groups.
Right.
Again, they live in the same subdivision. I'll kind of show you my graphic here. But one is on Green Avenue and the other one's on Yellow Street.
Yep.
Right? They're still within Box 4, but one is in the upper part of Box 4, the other in that upper, almost emerging into Box 5. That other group is kind of in the middle, trending toward the bottom half of that middle of Box 4. So again, same subdivision, but they don't reside on the same street. Distinct
characteristics. There's something pretty obvious of this group can do this, Group A can do this, and Group B can't do this yet.
Absolutely.
Or hasn't shown it yet.
Yeah. In this next one, we're talking about groups that are 125 to 250 points. Here, these are significant differences. In other words, in the percussion box, in the brass box, with Group A, you were saying consistently. With Group B, you were saying usually a lot.
Right.
Now, in both woodwind sections, you might have been able to say consistently the whole time. Both ensembles, you were saying consistently the whole time. So they don't differ on all five boxes, or all five subcaptions, excuse me. But inside of a couple of subcaptions, there are some identifiable differences. Again, to use that time analogy, if you like that one, if we had prelims and then we didn't have finals for 3 weeks, and we came back 3 weeks later and saw those groups, maybe they could change, but there's no hope for them changing today or even in a week, or it would take a while. And to show that to you graphically, Group 1, I left Group 1 the same place the whole time. It's at the upper edge of Box 4. We are now at the exact other side. So we skipped over an entire box and we're in another lower box. Or another lower third, I should say. So in other words, that top group was there in the top of Box 4. We're now in the bottom of Box 4. And so still maybe in the same subdivision, but
one's a gated community and one's not.
Yeah, you're the gated side of the community versus the. So I mean, you can kind of see like there's that lower group, excuse me, is not going to catch that upper group today or tomorrow.
In the visual sheet, the area sheet, some examples I've seen of this where the ensemble, like they're really good about staying halfway between two people. They're hitting their dots. where one group has some obvious really good training individually, like their method of training, how they're getting there is very you could tell they spend a lot of time and take a lot of pride in how they choose to move, where this other group, just as accurate within the areas, it's like, well, it's a little messy, like the foot placement's not the same, upper bodies aren't nearly as detailed, and you can tell it's not a high priority. You can see those on the visual sheet like you can the music sheet.
Absolutely. In this last one, if you gap groups by 250 points, a quarter of the sheet, right, because 1,000 points, you're essentially, or thinking out of 100, you're gapping them out of a 25 points. So for example, if Mark and I took the same math test and he made a 95, I made a 70, he needs a whole lot of different information going forward out of that test than I do. He might have one little arithmetic error that the teacher's going to correct him on, whereas mine are going to be more conceptual. Like, Jerry, I don't think you really understood the concepts that we're being quizzed on today. These are groups that are not going to reverse this season. I'm not going to, the next test we take a month from now, going to get a stronger score than Mark would. This is a completely different box, a completely different subdivision. These groups don't really exist on the same plane. So to look at it in this 1,000-point tote sheet, they're almost 3 full columns away from each other. And so again, I think in trying to set up your numerical scale with your 0s and your 5s and your 2s and your 7s, you can also utilize this tool to make sure that you've got the groups spread apart enough and that spread has meaning. So that if I'm the band director who is, let's say that I'm 1 out of advancing on from area prelims, I look at the results and I know 5 groups are going to go to state or 4 groups are going to go to state, and I'm that 1 out and I'm hoping to get in. If I see that all the judges have me within striking distance, aka within 50 points, 40 points out of 1,000, I can maybe coach up the kids appropriately, as opposed to if I look and I'm 200 points away from all the groups that are advancing to state. That's pretty much going to be what it's going to be for the standards,
philosophy, training. I mean, there's substantial. We're going to have to go back and really rethink how we do this for next year. Yeah,
absolutely. We're going to go forward into subcaption integrity. The next 2 are a reflection of what we're seeing on some recaps regarding both subcaption integrity and subcaption profiling. We're first going to talk about integrity, and I'm going to tell you, I don't normally like to start with the negative, but I'll start with the negative, which is where a judge might go down a column and go, let's say we're judging music, and we have woodwind, brass, and percussion all worth 200 points, and I see them go 150, 150, 150. Right. And in my mind, I go, there is no way that their woodwinds and their brass and their percussion were all at exactly 150 points. Right. Now, I'm okay if it's inside of that first box and or first block of the day, you're wanting to use your zeros, and so, but one of them's going to be 160. One's going to be 140. Right? It's not really going to be 150, 150, 150 the whole way down. And so when we start to look at that, we need to understand that each subcaption stands alone in our ranking and rating system. If we're driving towards a bottom line and just a bottom line number, that's an ineffective way to judge. We need to assess all 5 in the case of music, or 3 in the case of visual, subcaptions as we work through it. Again, thinking through, in addition to this, what we talked about earlier, the what and the how, and those subcaptions then have a whole lot more meaning to them. Again, on the visual front, the individual, the ensemble, and then the content. So I picked just a random box here. This is we went to visual, right? That we're going to see some groups inside of here. Let's pick band 1 is red here. They were very close, both in terms of the individual and in terms of where they were on the upper end of consistency from an individual perspective, but you can see, and usually kind of upper end of there. So there was some issues, maybe the training was there, but when we actually came to hitting the dots, some of the clarity moving together, we weren't there. Whereas you see band 2 is in that middle box, as opposed to the ensemble score where they're kind of in the lower. Band number 4 in orange, almost exactly the same place. Band number 3 in green, very close, both inside of that usually box. Again, it's not as big for me of a concern on the visual sheet, because the individual box is out of 300 and the ensemble box is out of 400. I think judges tend to compartmentalize better. Where I find us getting into trouble are the woodwind, the brass, and the percussion
Absolutely,
boxes.
yeah.
It's tempting because they're all out of 200, and it's a frantic day to just go 150, 150, 150, moving on, instead of really showing that integrity between each one of them.
Letting the subcaptions, trusting the system, trusting your training, and trusting that I know this will be happening. And sure, it's not, oh no, it didn't end in a 0, it didn't end in a 5. Well, now you can go, okay, I'm close, I'm off by 1 there. But at least you said, I'm really going to reflect and say, you know what, the woodwinds, I don't really remember that much. What little they were featured, I'm going to give them that much credit. Or the percussion, wow, they are so dominant on the field, I'm really going to give them as much credit rather than sliding them and thinking about, okay, let's just kind of give them that area. But really trusting the system. I think judges in the old system, let's put it this way, it really kind of just said the bottom line was what it would need to be. It is steps backwards. We are digressing if we choose just to go ahead and do that. We have to say, no, we're going to trust this training that's really going to give an accurate snapshot. We want to be able to see that sheet and say, this tells me who that group, this is a portrait, this is a profile of a group, where it really says that versus, well, everybody's just kind of the same. Everyone's the same color. We don't want that.
Yeah, absolutely. I said I would mention this. I dropped into the box a new digital scoring asset that we've acquired from our friends in California, and thanks to Caleb for allowing us to use that. It allows you to, and I've got a whole video that explains how it works, but you'll type all of the groups in, and what you'll be able to do inside of the tote sheet there, that's a digital tote now, is actually pick the drop down for each of the groups where they set in the thirds in that box. And so it's my hope that that can even help further our precision with subcaption integrity and making sure that we really are evaluating, yes, we're wearing the music hat, but we're evaluating 5 different areas. We're wearing the visual hat, we're evaluating 3 different areas. And yes, they do touch and influence one another, but that doesn't mean that their scores are going to match all the way across the board, and that we have to ensure that the band is getting the best read from us as possible, and understanding that, okay, based on the information provided by the judges, our individual movement was very strong today, ensemble we were not as good, as opposed to, well, we got the same scores across the board on everything. So I think you walk away from that as a band director going, I'm not really sure beyond the spoken commentary what the score says to me about how well we did.
I think everyone's comfort level obviously is with that. That would be with your training now happening in September. If you really were diligent weekly, every other week, worked on this and how to input that information, I think you would find you would be very comfortable with manipulating. I'm listening and I understand I can enter my scores there. Maybe it's something you want to evolve from just handwritten scores, which you could do, but you could probably have an iPad set up where you could keep that going. What a great visual representation to keep you grounded.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to dive into another exemplar. Since we've been talking visual, let's do a visual exemplar. This is going to be Kyle Miller, no relation, doing this visual exemplar.
Yeah, just a little early exit there, woodwinds, after that incredible, challenging musical line, plus the sophistication of your choreo. Be consistent in time. Yeah, there's some excellent piccolo toe points there. Great to see that. On the turn, backstage shift, well done. Yeah, so some of the color guard seems to kind of pulse through here and bounce before the next segment of the phrase begins. Others kind of internalize it. I don't know what the choice is, but maybe consistency could grow a little bit, and we'll look for that moving forward. Yeah, you did a great job of the challenging part, moving through a lot of playing performers without getting in the way, and then really selling the energy. But some of that unboundness, unbridledness, I might call it, because of the bounce, seemed more intense than others. Yeah, great to see the choreography changing here to show the range of the skills here within the weapon line. And that inverted relief. takes you to the turnaround. Good consistent effort there, Rifles. And in the Sabres. I love the parallel. And then moving it through the legs. Very mature effort here choreographically. I'm also watching the percussion because they're interplaying with that space with great consistency and the groupings of toms and snares and then culminating here.
So as you can probably tell, Kyle is on the field with that group. That is a state clip. I thought it would be interesting to hear him talk about we're approaching consistency. You know, you could almost feel not just what box he was in, but what third of a box he was in by some of the terms that he used inside of there. Again, too, as a visual judge, I liked that in terms of consistency when he spoke to color guard, it wasn't a comment that was requiring a very deep color guard background, which I know some of us judges have. Others don't have that depth of experience. A-okay, like he's saying, I'm seeing this bounce present in some performers, but I'm not seeing it present in all performers, and I'm just not sure. He doesn't necessarily say this is good, this is bad, he's just saying it's not consistent from performer to performer. And I think it's good for us to recognize that as adjudicators, because that's something that can very easily make it back to the kids between a prelims and finals round to say, hey, the judges are commenting on the fact that some of you are bouncing through the space here, others are not. What is our training? Our training is X. We need to make sure we are, true to our training.
Yeah, the effort is the word that comes to mind. It's a variety of effort level. It could be age. It could be where some students are more nervous being younger versus some that are a little more experienced. What I love about Kyle's commentary is he is valuing everyone on the field. It's not like I'm going to ignore the color guard. Everyone is getting like, you have value, you have depth. Hey, percussion, you're doing this. Woodwinds, it was awesome. Everyone is receiving incredible attention, and he's also giving credit in those areas, which is what we want. It's not like, hey, got you. It's more like, hey, this is awesome. Keep this up. Wow, Sabres between the legs. And as a student, they've got to really love that.
Yeah, you definitely feel like you've been seen.
Yeah.
And that your efforts are being appreciated as a student on the field. One more exemplar here. This is Ted Wemhoff. Again, we kind of did some music ones earlier. We're diving into a few visual ones on this side. Let's check out Ted's commentary here.
Yeah, on the pairings here, again, extending range of what you're asking the performers to do, not only with the body responsibilities, but the form responsibilities during that moment in the pairings and the diagonals. Really, really well handled. Good for you, performers. Really gorgeous moment here. The texture, the use of color here to change the expressive qualities here visually. Yeah, well done. The way that form shifts into the flower. Effort quality changes through the body, and then the immediate change here in the velocity. Performer understanding that shift, being able to make it on immediately. Yeah, the imagery here of the gears. Some slight challenges in terms of the linear alignment and the rotations, but very minor. And again, more variety and range in terms of the use of the body over on side 2 with the woodwinds.
We talked about music judges who try not to talk over musical moments. I'm sure there were visual things that could be moving around. Ted did a great job of also spacing, absorbing, processing, and I'm sure there were things that were happening, but he would summarize it, and it was nice to hear him not just going through and talking concepts over the top of this one, but recognizing excellence, talking about this was well done there, and you could hear he was genuinely moved. He would react. This was humorous, so I would laugh about it, and I love to hear the human nature of it, but you could tell he was still in analysis mode while he was doing that.
And I think one of the things that's resonated with me most about all these exemplars we've heard today is that the biggest moments we're noticing judges not talking over them. That we're noticing judges taking in those 2D ensemble moments and allowing themselves the space to react in a very genuine way without feeling like you're talking over the top of that.
You're not trying to compete with the moment.
Yeah, and I think that that's oftentimes those big moments, as you all know, as band directors, we spend so much time on those moments, and to hear a judge just kind of run over the top of it talking about something else that happened before, it's like when you know and the pacing guides you to know that that's about to happen, I think it's an opportunity to just sit and take it in for a moment and don't feel like you need to be providing stream of consciousness for 7 straight minutes, but just give it a little bit of space inside of there. I think it's a great approach. Well, with that, we have one more scoring concept to talk to you about, and that has to do with profiling, and it kind of feeds off of the comment I just made about the 150, 150, 150 in the music front, which is we need to make sure that woodwind scores are independent from brass and percussion scores, not just because we want to ensure that we're giving them good information, but that also I want you to think from an educational perspective. If you have, out of 200 points in each of those 3 boxes, you have that's really best case scenario, you have a 190 in woodwinds, a 185 in brass, and a 150 in percussion. That sends a message to me.
Tells a story.
Yeah, that when and especially amongst 3 music judges, if you have a similar profile across 3 music judges, that's going to be a conversation for you as a staff if you're advancing on to state out of area, if that wrapped up your season and you're moving into next year, to say, when we look at these numbers as a staff, it's obvious to us that we need to invest more in percussion either, and you can get as specific as, is it the content that's holding us back? Is it just the individual? Is it the performance capture that's holding us back? Yeah. Right. And how often did that impact the ensemble side of things too, right? Because we're looking at the recap, not just vertically looking at the recap, but also viewing the recap horizontally across the 5 subcaptions, or in the visual front, across the 3 subcaptions, to say, ensemble and content-wise, we're seeing a lot of credit, but individual marching, individual visual, maybe it's choreographic, we're not seeing that same amount of credit. The judge's profile indicates that we need to do more with regard to our individual training. So when we come back for summer band next year, we're going to be sure that we're diving into individual training at a higher level.
I think not only with the directors of the group, but as a judge, let's say you have judged before, and take one of your recaps and look at what you've said, like you have something pulled up on the screen here, summarize it. It should tell the story, and then woodwinds were good, but not as good as the brass. Wow, I was blown away with the color guard here, or something. It tells a story. Individually, not as strong, but ensemble marching. And then did it tell the right story? And you look at it and going, that's not what I meant at all.
Yeah.
But you should be able to see that's the areas where that was the difference, that one section, those 2 sections, or individually they're just not on the same par as the next group.
Well, so I pulled for you an area recap here. I've removed the names so to protect the innocent. So look at the top rank group. So this judge, she has them individually in second, but ensemble and content were in first, which is how they ended up on top. And then you can see that next group must have had some really strong individual performers, but from an ensemble perspective, they really weren't.
Not competitive, yeah.
What story does that tell you as a band director?
Yeah.
It
says we're oblivious, or something's happening where the ensemble is not. Students are rushing to their spots too soon. There are students not recovering. Is there understanding ensemble skills? Has it been talked about? Has it been addressed? It tells a couple different stories.
Yeah. Whereas that 3rd place group there, that this judge has 4th overall. Understand this recap is in order of how all the judges scored them, right?
Yeah.
But that 3rd place group there, who this judge happens to have in 4th, pretty consistent. You
Yeah,
know, I mean,
yeah.
third to fourth. You look at that next place down, and you go, the individual was in fourth, but yet the ensemble and content they felt were very strong.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we look at the recap, I know that as band directors, I think we tend to look at the recap vertically as to how we ranked against
Yeah.
other groups.
Comparison.
You know, look at it horizontally too, and ask yourself, what story am I telling this band about the performance they just offered? Okay, let me give you another one. This is on the music side, right? In this one, look at the profile of that top-ranked group.
All over the place.
If I'm advancing the state, and assumedly this group finished first, I think this was a finals recap, if I recall, because there's only 10 places here.
Yeah.
If I'm this group, what am I doing this week to make sure getting into state that we are not going to be in trouble? You better darn well bet that every band director is going to be paired with the woodwind section.
That's right.
Everybody's on woodwinds
Lots of
this week.
attention, yeah.
Because we still won the show, and if you look at the group underneath musically, 1-1-1, 2-2-1, all very similar, there was clearly a major concern with what was going on in the woodwind. So I'm going to listen closely to that judge's audio file, and I'm going to begin to make some really key decisions there.
And it could be perception. It could be we're really doing that, but the perception is we're not doing it. Maybe we're covering them up. Maybe it's they're getting overhyped, and it's the competition. The performance was not indicative of how they really are.
Yeah.
So then there could be several different angles you could approach that.
And look at the group. They have ranked 6th with an 892. They have their woodwinds in second, right? This judge has the woodwinds in second.
Strength of the program.
Right, which again I think could be, a feather in the cap for those kids to say, look at how great you did. You know, you certainly, outdid yourselves. Even though when we start to profile things, we see that 180 in woodwind and the 180 in brass, but notice that the 180 in woodwind earns you a 2nd place, the 180 in brass earns you a 6th place. Yeah. And so, again, that horizontal tale we tell as adjudicators has to have a strong sense of meaning. And so to kind of sew it all up as we get into the last minute of our training here, we're using that rating and ranking system through region, impression analysis comparison, and now when we get into the area round, I want you to think carefully about these 5 tools. You have the use of thirds of the box, the numerical scale and the 0s and the 5s and the 2s and the 7s. You understand value of a tenth and how those gaps have some meaning to them. We understand not just subcaption integrity, that they have to exist far apart, but from a profile perspective, the horizontal story that we tell as judges to help groups understand what they need to do to improve next week if they're going to state or next season. And so it's our hope that all of these work well to further your cause as judges. I do, before we go, want to mention that there's that really great online document that's linked. Take a look at that and all of the tools that are there. There are a ton of resources that you can look through. There are things you can print. There are documents that you can utilize on the day, some live scoring things. Please don't be shy about diving into that, about if you're judging something maybe early season that's using the area format, perhaps there's an opportunity for you to play with that and try it there. Yeah, and if it doesn't work at lunch, then you can close it and say, this wasn't for me. But we want to thank you so much. I'll speak on behalf of Mark and myself for coming to this training and spending some time with us today. Please know if you're a judge and you're an active band director, maybe you're mentoring some band directors, share this training with them. There's information in here that's intended, it's transparent to benefit absolutely everybody and to help grow the directors in the process.
Thank you for your dedication to the field. It's since we've introduced this new concept of sheets, we get so much great feedback from not only the band programs but the judging community. And thank you for your dedication. This really means a lot that you're willing to take time, because the kids deserve it, the programs deserve it. In the state of Texas, music and marching arts definitely deserve it.
Absolutely. There's one final quiz before we let you go. I'm going to link the quiz below. Once you've taken that quiz, you are good to log off. Thank you again for participating in this process. Thank you again for your dedication to our kids, and we look forward to seeing you out there.